morning friends, how are you all? I'm Nupur. Welcome to my channel, Nature at the Very Core of Science. Today I'm just going to read a story which is very dear to me, that is out of Africa. I think many of you must have heard about of the movie, and it is a 1985 American epic romantic drama film directed and produced by Sidney Pollack and starring Meryl Streep and Robert Redford. To me, Out of Africa movie is my solace in the life. What is that love where there is no separation? So many people walk the path of life bearing the pain of separation. My all-time favorite movie. And there it was Karen's farm. And at one time, Kenya meant Karen. And I watched this movie simply to cry. The love in which the intense fire of separation burns becomes immortal. I later visited Kenya in 2011, thinking only about the farm of Karen Blixen. And here I got the book from my Trevorwood County Library, and I'm going to read the story from the book for you. If you love, then I'm happy. So let's start the story. The Nagang Farm. I had a farm in Africa at the foot of the Nagang Hills. The equator runs across these highlands 100 miles to the north, and the farm lay at an altitude of over 6,000 feet. In the daytime, you felt that you had got high up near to the sun, but the early mornings and evenings were limpid and restful, and the nights were cold. The geographical position and the height of the land combined to create a landscape that had not its like in all the world. There was no fat on it and no luxuriance anywhere. It was Africa distilled up through 6,000 feet, like the strong and refined essence of a continent. The colors were dry and burnt, like the colors in pottery. The trees had a light, delicate foliage, the structure of which was different from that of the trees in Europe. It did not grow in boughs or cupolas, but in horizontal layers. And the formation gave it to the tall, solitary trees a likeness to the palms, or a heroic and romantic air like full-rigged ships with their sails clewed up, and to the edge of a wood a strange appearance as if the whole wood were faintly vibrating. Upon the grass of the great plains, the crooked, bare, old thorn trees were scattered, and the grass was spiced like thyme and bog myrtle. In some places, the scent was so strong that it smarted in the nostrils. All the flowers that you found on the plains or upon the creepers and liana in the native forest were diminutive like flowers of the downs. Only just in the beginning of the long rains, a number of big, massive, heavy-scented lilies sprang out on the plains. The views were immensely wide. Everything that you saw made for greatness and freedom and unequaled nobility. The chief feature of the landscape and of your life in it was the air. Looking back on a sojourn in the African highlands, you were struck by your feeling of having lived for a time up in the air. The sky was rarely more than pale blue or violet, with a profusion of mighty, weightless, ever-changing clouds towering up and sailing on it, but it has a blue vigor in it, and at a short distance it painted the ranges of hills and the woods a fresh deep blue. In the middle of the day, the air was alive over the land like a flame burning. It scintillated, waved, and shone like running water, mirrored and doubled all objects, and created great fata morgana. Up in this high air, you breathed easily, drawing in a vital assurance and lightness of heart. In the highlands, you woke up in the morning and thought, "Here I am, where I ought to be." The mountain of Nagang stretches in a long ridge from north to south and is crowned with 4 noble peaks like immovable darker blue waves against the sky. It rises 8,000 feet above the sea and to the east 2,000 feet above the surrounding country. But to the west, the drop is deeper and more precipitous, the hills fall vertically down towards the Great Rift Valley. The wind in the highlands blows steadily from the north to northeast. It is the same wind that down at the coasts of Africa and Arabia they named the monsoon, the east wind, which was King Solomon's favorite horse. Up here it is felt as just the resistance of the air as the earth throws herself forward into space. The wind runs straight against the Nagang Hills, and the slopes of the hills would be the ideal place for setting up a glider that would be lifted upwards by the currents over the mountain top. The clouds which were travelling with the wind struck the side of the hill and hung round it, or were caught on the summit and broke into rain. But those that took a higher course and sailed clear of the reef dissolved to the west of it over the burning desert of the Rift Valley. Many times I have from my house followed these mighty processions advancing, and have wondered to see their proud floating masses, as soon as they had got over the hills, vanish in the blue air and be gone. The hills from the farm changed their character many times in the course of the day, and sometimes looked quite close, and at other times very far away. In the evening, when it was getting dark, it would first look, as you gazed at them, as if in the sky a thin silver line was drawn all along the silhouette of the dark mountain. Then, as night fell, the four peaks seemed to be flattened and smoothed out, as if the mountain was stretching and spreading itself. From the Nagang Hills, you have a unique view. You see to the south the vast plains of the great game country that stretches all the way to Kilimanjaro. To the east and north, the park-like country of the foothills with the forest behind them, and the undulating land of the Kikuyu Reserve, which extends to Mount Kenya 100 miles away. A mosaic of little square maize fields, banana groves and grassland, with here and there the blue smoke from a native village, a small cluster of peaked mole casts. But towards the west, deep down, lies the dry, moon-like landscape of the African low country. The brown desert is irregularly dotted with the little marks of the thorn bushes. The winding riverbeds are drawn up with crooked dark green trails. Those are the woods of the mighty, wide-branching mimosa trees with thorns like spikes. The cactus grows here, and here is the home of the giraffe and the rhino. The hill country itself, when you get into it, is tremendously big, picturesque and mysterious, varied with long valleys, thickets, green slopes and rocky crags. High up under one of the peaks there is even a bamboo grove. There are springs and wells in the hills. I have camped up here by them. In my day, the buffalo, the eland and the rhino lived in the Nagang Hills. The very old native remembered a time when there was elephants there, and I was always sorry that the whole Nagang mountain was not enclosed in the game reserve. Only a small part of it was a game reserve, and the beacon on the southern peak marked the boundary of it. When the colony prospers and Nairobi, the capital, grows into a big city, the Nagang Hills might have made a matchless game park for it. But during my last years in Africa, many young Nairobi shop people ran out into the hills on Sundays on their motorcycles and shot at anything they saw, and I believe that the big game will have wandered away from the hills through the thorn thickets and the stony ground farther south. Up on the very ridge of the hills and on the four peaks themselves, it was easy to walk. The grass was short as on a lawn, with the grey stone in places breaking through the sod. Along the ridge up and down the peaks, like a gentle switchback, there ran a narrow game path. One morning at the time that I was camped in the hills, I came up here and walked along the path, and I found on it fresh tracks and dung of a herd of eland. The big, peaceful animals must have been up on the ridge at sunrise, walking in a long row, and you cannot imagine that they had come for any other reason than just to look deep down on both sides at the land below. We grew coffee on my farm. The land was in itself a little too high for coffee, and it was hard work to keep it going. We were never rich on the farm, but a coffee plantation is a thing that gets hold of you and does not let you go, and there is always something to do on it. You are generally just a little behind with your work. In the wildness and irregularity of the country, a piece of land laid out and planted according to rule looked very well. Later on, when I flew in Africa and became familiar with the appearance of my farm from the air, I was filled with admiration for my coffee plantation that lay quite bright green in the grey-green land, and I realized how keenly the human mind yearns for geometrical figures. All the country round Nairobi, particularly to the north of the town, is laid out in a similar way, and here lives a people who are constantly thinking and talking of planting, pruning or picking coffee, and who lie at night and meditate upon improvements to their coffee factories. Coffee growing is a long job. It does not all come out as you imagine when yourself young and hopeful. In the streaming rain, you carry the boxes of your shining young coffee plants from the nurseries, and with the whole number of farm hands in the field watch the plants set in the regular rows of holes in the wet ground where they are to grow, and then have them thickly shaded against the sun with branches broken from the bush, since obscurity is the privilege of young things. It is 4 or 5 years till the trees come into bearing, and in the meantime you will get drought on the land or diseases, and the bold native weeds will grow up thick in the fields. The blackjack, which has long scabrous seed vessels that hang on to your clothes and stockings. Some of the trees have been badly planted with their tap roots bent. They will die just as they begin to flower. You plant a little over 600 trees to the acre, and I had 600 acres of land with coffee. My oxen dragged the cultivators up and down the fields between the rows of trees, many thousand miles, patiently awaiting coming bounties. There are times of great beauty on a coffee farm. When the plantation flowered in the beginning of the rains, it was radiant sight, like a cloud of chalk in the mist and the drizzling rain over 600 acres of land. The coffee blossom has a delicate, slightly bitter scent, like the blackthorn blossom. When the field reddened with the ripe berries, all the women and the children, whom they call the totos, were called out to pick the coffee off the trees together with the men. Then the wagons and carts brought it down to the factory near the river. Our machinery was never quite what it should have been, but we had planned and built the factory ourselves and thought highly of it. Once the whole factory burned down and had to be built up again. The big coffee dryer turned and turned, rumbling the coffee in its iron belly with a sound like pebbles that are washed about on the seashore. Sometimes the coffee would be dry and ready to take out of the dryer in the middle of the night. That was a picturesque moment, with many hurricane lamps in the huge dark rooms of the factory. That was hung everywhere with cobwebs and coffee husks, and with eager glowing dark faces in the light of the lamps round the dryer. The factory, you felt, hung in the great African night like a bright jewel in an Ethiop's ear. Later on, the coffee was hulled, graded, and sorted by hand and packed in sacks sewn up with a saddler's needle. Then in the end, in the early morning, while it was still dark and I was lying in bed, I heard the wagons loaded high up with coffee sacks, 12 to a ton, with 16 oxen to each wagon, starting on their way into the Nairobi railway station up the long factory hill, with much shouting and rattling, the drivers running beside the wagons.